Alex, I spent 3 weeks building a white oak sideboard once. Dovetails so tight you couldn't slip a whisper between them. Then came the finish. I grabbed a can of golden oak, wiped it on, and within 10 minutes, the whole thing looked like a leopard with a skin condition.
A leopard? That's a vivid image for a piece of furniture. I'm guessing the golden part didn't exactly pan out.
It looked like I'd let a caffeinated toddler loose with a sponge. Blotches everywhere. I was so heartbroken, I almost turned the whole thing into firewood right then and there. That's the thing about staining. It's the last 5% of the job, but it's the only part people actually see. If the color's a mess, the joinery doesn't matter.
It's the ultimate high-stakes gamble. You've done all the hard work, the wood is beautiful, and now you're going to saturate it with chemicals and pray it doesn't rebel. But people always ask me, why can't it just be like painting? You buy a gallon of eggshell white. It looks like eggshell white. Why is wood so stubborn?
Because paint is a blanket, but stain is more like a tinted lens. You're dealing with a living, breathing straw factory. Wood is just a bundle of microscopic straw-like tubes. Some are packed tight, some are wide open. If you don't manage how those straws drink up the pigment, you're basically just inviting chaos into your shop.
Okay, let's solve the chaos. If I want a table that doesn't look like a leopard, where do we actually start? Because I feel like most people blame the can of stain, but it sounds like the mystery starts way before we pop the lid.
Honestly, the real work happens with the sandpaper. If you're inconsistent with your sanding, you're essentially carving different drainage zones into the wood. If I sand one half of a board with 120 grit and the other half with 220, the 120 side is going to look like a dark, stormy night, and the 220 side is going to look like a pale morning.
Wait, so the smoother you sand, the lighter the color? That feels counterintuitive. Wouldn't smoother wood grab more?
Nope, it's the opposite. Think of it like a paved road versus a gravel path. The rougher surface, the lower grit, creates more valleys and scratches for the pigment to hide in. When you go up to 220 or 320, you're basically polishing those straws shut. The stain just slides right off because there's nowhere for the mud of the pigment to settle.
So the secret isn't just sanding a lot, it's sanding exactly the same amount everywhere.
Precisely. And don't get me started on the end grain, the edges where the straws are pointing right at you. Those things are thirsty. If you don't sand them at least 1 or 2 grits higher than the rest of the piece, they'll soak up so much stain, they'll turn black. You have to literally burnish those pores shut so they don't drink the whole can in one gulp.
Burning the straws shut. I like that. But what about the wood types? I've seen people complain about pine and cherry being the problem children of the finishing world.
Pine is the wild child. It's got these patches of sap and varying densities that make it absorb stain like a dry sponge in a puddle. For those blotchy woods, your pines, alders, and cherries, you basically need a bouncer at the door. That's where wood conditioner comes in.
Is wood conditioner just watered down glue? Because that's what it smells like.
It's not far off. It's basically a pre-wash. You're partially filling those thirsty pores, so when the stain arrives, it can't rush in all at once. It's like giving the wood a light snack so it doesn't gorge itself on the main course and get sick.
Okay, so preparation is the foundation, but eventually we have to pick a poison. You go to the big box store and there's a wall of cans, oil, water, gel, all-in-ones. It's a lot. If I want consistency, is there a clear winner?
They all have their moods. Oil-based is the old reliable. It stays wet longer, which gives you time to move it around and wipe it off. It sinks deep. If you're doing a big project, oil gives you that open time so you don't end up with lap marks where one section dried before you could finish the next.
But the smell and the dry time. I've had oil stains stay tacky for 3 days because the humidity was slightly off.
True. It's a slow dance. Water-based is the sprint. It's environmentally friendlier, dries fast, and stays true to color without yellowing as much over time. But man, it's twitchy. It raises the grain, makes the wood feel fuzzy. And if you aren't fast, you'll see every stroke of the rag.
And then there's gel stain, which feels like spreading chocolate pudding on a dresser.
It does, but don't knock the pudding. Gel stain is a lifesaver for vertical surfaces or for woods that are notoriously uneven. Since it's thick, it doesn't dive into the pores. It sits on top. It's more like a translucent paint. If you're trying to make a pine door look like mahogany, gel stain is your best friend because it hides the wood's personality a bit more.
So if oil is a deep soak and gel is a coating, what's the pro move for someone who wants that high-end furniture showroom look?
Lately, I've been leaning into these hard wax oils, the ones where the pigment and the protection are one. You rub it in, It bonds with the fibers and you're done. But for traditional staining, the secret isn't in the product, it's in the scrap wood. People always skip the test board. They'll spend $500 on lumber and won't spend 10 minutes testing the finish on an offcut. I once did a walnut desk where I assumed the dark walnut stain would just make it walnutier. It turned the wood the color of an old tire.
An old tire, that's a look.
It was depressing. Now, I keep a sample graveyard under the bench. Every project gets a test piece that goes through the exact same sanding schedule as the main piece. No shortcuts. If I sand the table to 180, the scrap gets sanded to 180.
That makes sense. But let's talk about the mechanics. I see people using brushes, rags, those little foam sponges. Does it matter how the stain gets from the can to the wood?
As long as you get it on there evenly and wipe it off promptly, the applicator is just a delivery truck. The bigger issue is the wet edge. If you're staining a large tabletop, you can't stop halfway to answer the phone. If a section starts to dry and you overlap it with fresh stain, that overlap will be twice as dark. You have to be like a machine. Start at one end, keep moving, and wipe back with the grain.
What about temperature? I remember you telling me about a project that went south because you tried to finish it in your garage in February.
Oh, the Minneapolis deep freeze. Yeah. If the wood is too cold, the molecules are basically huddling together for warmth. They won't let the stain in. On the flip side, if it's 95 degrees and humid, the solvent evaporates too fast and the pigment settles in Highland clumps. You want that Goldilocks zone, room temperature, dry air. If you're sweating or shivering, your wood is probably unhappy too.
So let's recap for the person standing in their garage right now, looking at a half-finished bookshelf. Sanding must be robotic and consistent. Use a conditioner if it's a thirsty wood. Choose your stain based on how fast you can work. And for the love of all that is holy, use a scrap piece first.
And don't be afraid of layers. Everyone thinks they have to get the color perfect in one heavy coat. That's a recipe for a muddy mess. It's much better to do 2 or 3 thin, controlled passes. You can always make it darker, but making it lighter involves a belt sander and a lot of tears.
Is there a point of no return? Like, if you wipe it off and it's too dark, are you just stuck with a dark bookshelf?
There's always the mineral spirits trick. If you catch it while it's still fresh, you can sometimes wash some of the pigment back out with a rag soaked in solvent. It's like a soft reset. But really, the best way to get consistent color is to respect the material. You aren't applying color, you're negotiating with the wood.
Negotiating with the wood. I like that. It's a partnership, not a takeover.
Exactly. When you stop fighting the grain and start working with it, that's when you get that glow, that deep, three-dimensional look that makes people want to reach out and touch the surface.
Just wait until the finish is dry before they touch it, please.
Well, that's a lesson for another episode. How to remove fingerprints from wet polyurethane. Ask me how I know about that. Actually, don't.
Closing thoughts, Tiger? For the person who's terrified of ruining their hard work?
Don't rush the finish. We spend hours choosing the straightest boards and cutting the perfect joints, and then we try to stain it real quick before dinner. Treat the finishing process with the same reverence as the woodworking. Turn on some music, clear your bench, and take your time. A good finish is just a series of small, careful steps done with a bit of patience.
And maybe a little less coffee if your hands are shaky.
Definitely less coffee if you're doing the fine grit sanding.
Thanks for listening to The Den. Now go get your hands dirty. Just maybe wear some gloves this time.
Yeah, unless you want early American fingernails for a week. See you next time.